Hi, I'm Fraser T Smith, and I'm very, very pleased to have my music radar friends here to talk to today in my studio, nestled out in the hills in the country. And we're here talking about my writing production with artists such as Snow Patrol, Dave, Tempest, and with my own project, Future Utopia. I said I didn't at the time. I didn't know what a producer was because it wasn't YouTube, and now you can Google every aspect of a producer, and I'm still as confused as I was. But I think like it's good to have that fluid approach to being what a producer is, because in my world, it's like being of service to the artist, and it's being useful, and that can mean it definitely means that you have to be like the Swiss Army knife as a person, but also musically. So you have to be, for me anyway, this is my definition, long-winded definition, short-winded definition, I guess, a Swiss Army knife as a person and musically. But what that means is, from day to day, you could be needing to be there on a human level, and working out either like sort of scheduling issues or personal kind of issues, and working out how that could be resolved or fitted into the music, or obviously working with musicians and or in a lot of the cases, like I am the only musician, so being fluent enough on keys and guitar and drums and programming to give certain feels for records, which having done like probably 300 guitar sessions, I know how to bluff it really, really well. And obviously some people could argue, well, actually this particular thing isn't quite. But I had a situation a few months ago when I was working on the Tempest album, and I had this moment where we were writing this song called Till Morning, which is incredibly touching, sensitive record. And Kay said, I got this idea on the bass, that I'd love you to experiment with, and guided me on Spotify towards some Jaco Pastorius bass. And I was like, Kay, like, you got to understand, like, bass players spend their whole lives scratching the surface of what Jaco Pastorius could do. Like, I'm a guitar player. I understand what this is, but this may be like out of the realm of what I can do. But started playing, and what I realized was what Kay was meaning was not necessarily like the deftness and virtuosity of Jaco, but was more like a higher, like, chordal bass part, which we got, and it made me think, actually, add some chorus, do some editing, and it was something that we were able to achieve. But you can often be in those situations where, like, you can't be scared of some of the requests sometimes, so yeah. In addition to that, it's making sure that, to me, like, the environment is right, that you're creating like a safe space so that the artist or artists feel that they can delve deep into their soul and into their well of emotions and experiences, and create, making sure everything works, working with a great engineer, of who I'm so proud of the engineers I've worked with and are working with currently. Understanding, like, the absolute micro of some effects or some EQ on a hi-hat, down to the zooming out to the huge macro elements of, like, how an artist is feeling on any particular day. Having a team here, because we're a little bit remote, like, that can make sure that we can get really good food and drink, and that everyone's comfortable. Yeah, there's a lot to it. Not getting in the way when you don't have to, but ultimately being completely there when that needs to happen at the same time. I just aim to be, like, shape-shifting, and whatever the artist needs. I mean, there's things that I like I like the sound of big, warm drums. I like the sound, certain sounds will be indicative of things that I've done, because that piano sounds like that piano, but it was good for Adele, but it was also good for Kano and T-shirt Weather in the Manor. Like it can work in different ways. Set Fire to the Rain, I played down. T-shirt Weather in the Manor, it was still that very bright, aggressive sounding upright, but we put it into the MPC and triggered it in a different way. So you can use all the equipment in different formats. Snow Patrol love it as well, because it in that instance it sounds more like a sort of Elton John style, like 70s bright, and that's just one piano. So if you look at then at all the other bits of gear, like it's just using them to their fullest extent. And I think I usually let the process guide me in terms of what the thing is and what the right pieces of gear are. I've got enough gear. I wouldn't say I've got crazy amounts of gear. Every piece of gear in here like is used. It's very kind of utilitarian in the studio. It's not really a collector. Like if something's gathering dust, I usually sell it and buy something else, or just sell it because I prefer someone else to be using it. The bits that I've got in here are all used on a daily basis. And I think that sometimes it's cool then to sell loads of equipment and buy loads of new stuff, and it just gives you a different aesthetic and different feel. I mean, there's loads of things, because I always try and stay as inspired as possible. But I guess the Buchla 208, the easel, Buchla Command, which is over there. Just trying to understand like a little bit more about modular synthesis, which I think is definitely like a learning experience in synthesis itself. And I know like Buchla easel is not a new piece of technology, but it's definitely new for me. And working with Tom Rollins from the Chemical Brothers as I did, who's obviously, the absolute high priest of synthesis, definitely in my world and lots of other people's worlds, but just knowing how flexible he was and how inspirational he was, like as kids when we were at school, like plugging synths into distortion pedals and just having this like childlike fascination with sound that has obviously served him very, very well over the years in the music that he's made with Ed and the Chemical Brothers, and working with him recently, and he brought down a few pieces, and just seeing like his process and the way things sound like from source, that really inspired me to be able to like learn how to create sounds from scratch and be a little bit more experimental in that sense. I had always been someone that would start on a preset and then tweak that and learn how to like get the sound like very quickly. But I think you have to invest a bit more into like the modular world, and to start to understand really like what plugging certain things into different CVs do. And so yeah, that's been really inspiring. Different sound to me. It's obviously different process, but the output just seems like the actual sonic just seems very, very different to me. It feels kind of rawer and a bit more sort of teeth in a way than a lot of synths, which is what I love. I guess through like every iteration of my career, there's been things that have come up that like MP3s became a thing, and suddenly you could have like this huge music library when you didn't have, you only had your library, and you could listen to the radio, and then suddenly you could, people were just giving you disk drives of hundreds of thousands of songs, and of course like iTunes and advent of auto-tune. I make like some of the younger producers laugh in the studio, and I'm like, I remember the hardware version of auto-tune, which was this thing at the beginning where people were like, oh, this is going to be the death of singers, and then it just became a thing, and people use these things creatively. And I think as artists, we'll always use AI in a slightly kind of rebellious way will take something which is making things easier and then like subvert it. I think that's the way that great music is made. I'm sure someone's going to come with like the best AI album that is started as AI but then moved into this other place and this other world, which I think is really exciting. So yeah, I'm always embracing technology, but I think probably what it's done, which has been a real benefit, has woken people up to human connection and humanity, I guess, within music. Because we make things easy, but if you take out, like, I always talk about going the long way round in music production, because that's ultimately like where the process is really enjoyable, about starting off with nothing and bit by bit creating something which, of course, like you can go into Keyscape and play a MIDI sound from Keyscape into Logic, and that will sound amazing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you can also buy like a really cheap piano and mic it, and put that into SoundForge that you could buy off a cheap PC, and suddenly be like more of a visionary. And then maybe you'll understand, like we can understand like how Burial is so amazing, because he was doing a lot of his earlier stuff on, and I think it's like the outliers and the outlying type of processes like that, which are going to still mean that individuals can sound like individuals, rather than us sounding like this sort of conglomerate of similar sort of sound palettes, which is obviously a great place to start. But I think that then we owe it to ourselves and music and creativity and humanity to be like, whatever we can do to further the process. And it doesn't even need to be like, it's easy for me to say that because I've been in music a long time and I'm surrounded by all this incredible gear. But I mean, literally like going to Oxfam and buying yourself a £5 guitar that only has 2 strings on it. I mean, there was one at the tip that I went to. I was like, you could just, it's for free, and you can just make a sound with that, even record it directly into the computer without using the onboard mic, and just making something of that just, you don't have to play guitar, but like chop it up and just be like less led by the presets and by what's given to you for the sake of like an easy life. Because I read something on a headline the other day that on one streaming service, apparently there's 20,000 AI derived tracks being uploaded a day on one particular streaming service. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're making AI sounding music, like, why are you wasting your time on that? Like, surely we've got to make drastically different music from AI, because if 20,000 tracks are going on that have just been purely made without human interaction, then it's going to be a waste of time making something which resembles that. And I think that's a really positive sort of jolt for the creative community, because it's like, shit, yeah, well, we better get back to human connection and jamming and inconsistency and non-linearity and mistakes, happy accidents, and interesting sounds of different rooms, and all these like human type of failings, which are ultimately the essence of great music. I've been lucky enough to be invited to many establishments to talk to students up and down the country about music production, and I could see, the incredible thing about these courses is that they're well funded and they have incredible equipment, and there's great students in there that are learning an incredible amount. But what saddened me was that a lot of these institutions didn't feel particularly diverse. I was thinking, yeah, but what about huge communities who are being underrepresented here? And it didn't feel indicative of the country, and I think that music making and music production, if we're not careful, could potentially be the playground of the rich and the privileged, and that's just something which which can't happen. And I think that, it's very easy like to talk about these things, but in my view, like it's just more important to do something. So I was lucky enough to receive an award from the MPGs on a sort of basis of what I've been able to create over the years, and I thought that it would be really fitting to obviously receive that gratefully, but to put something back into music production. So the Future Producer Academy was born, and the academy is focusing on the lack of diversity within the production realm. It takes the form of 10 monthly seminars where we're going to be working with 16 students across the country. So it's nationwide. It's not also London centric. It's nationwide, and we're going to be working in lots of major studios all around the country and mentoring 16 young students from a variety of different backgrounds and cultures, and aiming to secure them work placements at the end of it, which I think is another really important thing for me. I could see these incredible colleges putting all these amazing students through the paces and coming out, but the really important thing for me is like, well, what happens next? And obviously part of the journey is to try and work it out, but if, in my mind, if we could be working with the major record companies and with studios and institutions in production capacity where we could offer the successful students that pass the course a placement to get them on track at the beginning of their careers, then that would be an incredible thing to do. So the application process has just finished, and we were 1,250% oversubscribed. So that was an incredible stat. So now we just have to deliver. So it starts in September, and I can't wait to get going on that. I think it's a very much a shape-shifting project, and I've always wanted it to be that. I never wanted to be hemmed in by what had happened before. And I think that as I develop as an artist and go through life, it's gonna always change, because we set out with such a broad introduction to what Future Utopia is, in that the first record, super philosophical, 32 collaborators, everyone from Black Panthers through to rappers, singers, visual artists, talking on there about the 12 questions and these philosophical subjects, with a backdrop of quite cinematic but also like hip-hop driven music, but also going into more like psychedelic areas. I think the psychedelia is something that's I've maintained through the records. I think after 12 questions and after lockdown, I really wanted to take this live, but obviously with such a huge production sound and so many collaborators, I was like, well, how can I do this? I started DJing the material. I've always DJed, so to be able to, the technicalities of DJing weren't difficult, but it was more the how we're going to present this. So went out with a kind of hybrid approach with SH101, a couple of sequencers, and lots of acapellas on from the record, which were very important, and then reimagined lots of the tracks with some incredible electronic artists like High and Frankie Wah and Uncle. So we put out another record which was called 12 Questions After Dark, just after lockdown, and then played lots of gigs. We did Glastonbury and played like Primavera and quite a lot of shows in that instance. And I felt like, this is great, but what's the next thing? And I felt that the amount of collaborators that I had on the first record, I didn't want to try and beat my first record. I was like, that is going to be the collaboration record that I'll always look back on fondly. And then maybe the next record, which turned into Django's High, maybe that has to be a singular approach, and maybe there's no collaborators on it. I think that it's cool to have a project where you can you can venture like fully into one world and then be like, well, what happens here? And I actually, when I was isolating, when I got COVID, I would watch like loads of Coen Brothers films for some reason. I just was like, what could I do like in isolation that would be really cool that I could look back on? And so I watched so many Coen Brothers films, and then I watched No Country for Old Men, and I love the aesthetic, the visual aesthetic on that. And then got into like Fistful of Dollars, and then just got into spaghetti western world, and then started writing these like strange songs that were spaghetti western inspired, but with a psychedelic kind of angle. And then Django is a name which is the most used name in spaghetti westerns. So I thought it'd be cool to have like a Django inspired name, but what if Django is like this symbol of kind of self-realization and this sort of figure that was like thinking like philosophically, which is where like a lot of the music is based for Future Utopia. And so that turned into Django's High, which is this slightly psychedelic spaghetti western type of record. And it was so nice to be able to take that live. You know, we did a UK tour, and we just got back from a European tour with the band. I'm out there with Molly J, who's an incredible singer, and then Anthony Sweetsticks Lewis on drums, and then we don't have a bass or keys, so I'm playing keys, singing, and doing like bass lines, but also guitar and Ableton looping stuff. So it's a really cool like 3-piece. We have loads of fun, and it's really nice to be able to perform these songs without having to call on collaborators. I mean, often we do. We played in Tempest, and Big Pig got out with us at some shows, a show in London, which is cool. But it's nice for that to be like the exception, not the norm. And we can go out and play, and we're doing like a bunch of festivals over the summer, which is really exciting. Really like the aim of it. You know, I never like to stand still. I never want to feel like I'm repeating myself, or like growth is the most important thing for me, you know, and just being better all the time, not in a like weird but competitive way, but it's just about there's so much to learn constantly, and stuff is always evolving, and I think we all evolve as people, and I think that being a songwriter and a producer, you can evolve in so many different ways because you can push yourself into different genres and have different roles, you know, as a producer and a songwriter. So I felt like I really wanted to stand up and be counted and have like my own songs out there. So I felt in some ways like more confident really in the room. And I think that also being able to relate to what artists are going through, you know, I mean, like I was talking earlier, you know, we played at Lowlands last year, that amazing festival in just outside Amsterdam, and then Kay was playing. So being able to like go and see Kay before the show. Dave's been to a show that we played quite recently in Oxford, and being able to talk about different experiences live, but also sometimes in terms of like the promotion, I can understand a lot more because I've actually been doing it myself, you know, and understand how challenging it could sometimes be to get things out, and if sometimes you're feeling super creative, and other times like maybe less so, and actually bringing that out of myself, and so therefore helping to bring it out of other people, which is really like the job of a producer, is to really be of service and help. So, you know, all of those things just, and also, I mean, on a sort of selfish way, but on a sort of self-renewal type of way. You know, you can be in the studio like making record after record after record. There's something really wonderful for me about going with like 2 really close friends of mine, plus the crew who are all really close friends. My engineers, Louis and Scott, just going onto the road and being out for like a summer of playing festivals, getting to meet new artists and seeing, you know, experiencing new music firsthand, not just off like the streaming services, and just being able to understand like what is moving crowds and audiences. And that's like an amazing gift to be able to do that. and really important, I think. Again, it's like similar to the way I work with artists, which are very, very broad church. It can come from like a loop. Django's High was coming up with these very short loops early in the morning and then just putting melodies down and then chopping into that and coming up with the lyrics. Sarah and I went down for a lot of that record. We went down to a place in Shannon, which is super remote, down in Cornwall, like near Land's End, like the furthest end of the country. And it was really good to write lyrics down there. The next single I've got coming out with Lava LaRue, which is called The Pleasure Trap, was based off a book I read called The Pleasure Trap, and that spurred like some of the lyrics first. And then I built that with the drums and a Juno, my Juno 106, so from more of an electronic side, but then added like vocoder and guitars and stuff. Very open ended, you know, which I think it's just the way I work, so it has to be like that. You know, next record could come from like a book of poetry that I'm reading, and it could be saying that to music, or could be something completely different. You know, I want to maintain that fluidity.